All right, let's learn some scrollytelling. So what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be using the delightful scrollama.js library in order to create a scrollytelling experience. So what is scrollytelling? If you're watching this video, you probably know. It's just one of these nice little experiences where there's something that sticks on the page and there's something that scrolls by and maybe this changes, maybe this changes. Used a lot in newsrooms, stuff like that. There are a few different ways that it works. These are all the simple examples from Scrollama, but they cover pretty much all of your use cases, from just having things that scroll by and highlight to having things that overlap and things like that. So the Scrollama examples are available in the Scrollama repository, but they're a little more complicated than I'd like them to be. They make use of D3 just because D3 is around, just because D3 is common. But you don't need D3, you don't need other tools. So what I've done is I've made my own repository that has almost all of the examples that are in the official repository. They're just simplified a little bit. So I'll put a link to that in the description. And if you want to code along, which you probably should, it'd be great if you download this. Click your good friend code, click download zip, and go from there. And you can see if you click through here, it's all pretty much the same as what's on the actual repository. Just a little bit different, So what we are going to do is we are going to be working with the overlay example here. So I already downloaded it, I unzipped it, it's all there. We're starting from scratch. The only thing different between my repository or the code that I'm using here and the code that is online is that I added an image in an images folder. It's just a JPEG of some mountains. We'll use it later on. So what we want to do is see how this page works. First off, actually, let's do sticky overlay. There are a few additional problems that we'll tackle in this, which will help you learn a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this sticky overlay example and we're going to turn it into something that is a little bit nicer than just this kind of template. We're going to see how to customize it. We're going to see what you can do with scrollytelling. We're going to see how to customize this background here, how to make different things happen when you hit different steps, things like that. So in watching this video, you should be somewhat comfortable with HTML, CSS. You should know that programming exists. Maybe you've coded a little bit. But if you're not the best at JavaScript, totally fine, because we're just going to be working from this template. So as long as you're fine with that, as long as you can feel comfortable working with something that you don't necessarily understand, I think that you'll be okay. So let's start by looking at the HTML here and what's going on. So first off, these templates have two different sets of CSS. So CSS is the stuff that kind of makes the page look like the page, sets the font, sets the color, things like that. Number one, we have a style.css. Style.css here is just the kind of basic thing of how this header up here looks, how this navigation looks, things like that. It doesn't really have anything to do with the scrollytelling. It's just the general styles of the page. So the idea is if you want to take this template and use it in something that is your own, where you're not going to have, this header here, where you're not going to have this title here, you can just delete the style.css line and that CSS will be gone. You won't need that file. You won't need any of that. Then we have the styles that are actually in the page themselves. So these are things that actually make the scrollytelling work. The scrollytelling here is a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you need all of those pieces to make it work. So HTML being the structure of all this stuff here, just like, hey, we have some words here. Hey, we have a number here, things like that. CSS being, here's what everything looks like. Here are background colors. Here's our padding, stuff like that. and JavaScript, which is what controls the actual interaction here. So what we are going to do is take this apart piece by piece. We're just going to say there is some styles here. There are some custom styles. Just trust that they work. Just trust they work now. Maybe in a later video, we'll go over what things necessarily mean. Maybe when we tweak it later, we'll go over what things mean. But for now, the CSS just exists and it makes things work. So scrolling down here, we have a nav, which is this navigation area up here. Do we necessarily care about that? No. There's a section right here that says, hey, this is the example. Here's some text, a little bit of a subhead there. Do we necessarily care about that? No. This is the part that really matters to us. This section here, ID scrolly, all the way down here to the closing of that section. This here is our scrollytelling. If we look at ID equals scrolly here and we scroll up, we see there is specifically a CSS rule for something with the ID of scrolly. That's what this hashtag or what this pound symbol means. It means if you find something on the page with the ID of scrolly, all of these rules apply to it. What do these rules mean? Who knows? Who knows? But that is, hey, here, this is the scrolly, probably something important. If you wanted to make multiple pieces of scrollytelling on here, all stacked on top of each other, what you would probably do is copy and paste this whole section and then put a new one right below it. You might give it a name like scrolly-2 if you were being uncreative. Hopefully you would name it something a little bit more interesting than that. And then you would go up here and you'd say, okay, along with scrolly, who knows what this means, but now I'm gonna have another one, scrolly-2. But we don't need to have multiple scrollytelling experiences right now. If you wanna get fancy, you might do that. For now, we just wanna focus on that one. So I did undo a few times, got rid of that extra CSS, got rid of that extra HTML. Just know everything from here is what's important. Now, in our scrollytelling, there are two different main pieces. Number one is the thing that sticks to the background, this thing that stays the same as you are scrolling down the page. I uncreatively renamed this to be sticky thing because it is a thing that sticks on the page as you scroll. That's part one. Part two are the steps. The steps are the different segments that scroll either over, in this example, or beside your sticky thing when you are doing your scrollytelling. Sometimes, for example, for basic, there is no sticky thing. It's all just different steps, first step, second step, third step. But generally speaking, if you're doing something a little bit fancier, it is based on having both steps, 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 steps, and some sort of sticky thing in the background. There's probably a real name for this, but I don't know what it is. So this is how our HTML is formatted. We have our sticky thing right here that starts off with a paragraph tag in it, has a 0 in it, so see it right there. And then we have all of our steps. Our steps are inside of an article tag, and that's in order to keep them together. This could honestly be any kind of tag. It could be a div tag that has a certain class on it, anything like that. But it's important that if you are using this code, you keep it as an article, because if you go up here, you see there is some sort of CSS that is based on that article. So you want to keep that the same. Class sticky thing, keep that the same. The P tag inside of the sticky thing, it has a size, it has a thickness, it has a color. Step, you cannot change any of these class names because of the fact that they are all steps. This says do something to the class step, do something to the class sticky thing. So if we change this, I said, oh, I want to make this a picture of a mountain. I'm going to change it to class equals mountain. When I refresh, suddenly this doesn't stick to the top of the page. The number isn't big in the middle. The background color changes. So just know you gotta keep these classes the same. If you end up changing them, you gotta change them up there. You can change all this data step stuff. That's fine. It's not really gonna affect anything right now in terms of styles. Just know the classes have to stay the same. Okay, now we have 2 JavaScript libraries that are being included here. Okay, we also have ID outro. It's just a bunch of empty space at the end of the page. The reason being, if you don't have a bunch of empty space at the bottom of the page, this line right here might never trigger that last step, and so it might never get highlighted, might never update the background. You'll be stuck at the second to last step forever. So you just add a little bit of extra space to help people scroll on down below. So now we have 2 different JavaScript libraries being included here. One of them is a tool that allows you to know when things interact with other things. In our case, we want to know when this line right here crosses over this box right here. So when this line crosses our first step, our second step, our third step, it's just a little helper that makes that happen easily. Next up, we have scrollama. Scrollama is the library that we are using here. It's a delight. It kind of stays in the background, so you don't really necessarily have to do that much. It's pretty clean. It's pretty nice. You can do all kinds of more complicated stuff with it, but we're sticking with a pretty simple example here. We are not using D3 for convenience. That line was there. That line is not there anymore because I got rid of it. So this is where all of our JavaScript lives. This is all of the stuff that we are doing to actually make this page interactive. If I got rid of everything inside of the script tag and then I refresh this page, it still looks like this. It looks pleasant. It looks like a scrollytelling experience, but the background's never changing. The number in the background's never changing. There's none of this highlighting, none of that stuff. So that is right here, us using scrollama. The very first thing that's happening here at the top of where scrollama is existing is just grabbing things off of the page and saving them for later. So a big part of JavaScript is called the DOM, the Document Object Model. And it's just the idea that there is stuff on the page. So if we look up here on this page, we have a sticky thing, which is a div. We have all these steps, which are divs. We have the article, that's a div. We have the section with the ID scrolly, stuff like that. And what happens is we want to say, hey, web page, let's do something with this scrolly area. As we scroll, let's change the value of this p tag that's inside of sticky thing. In order to be able to say, we want this number to change, we have to be able to say, let's grab this number off the page. Let's let JavaScript do something with that number. And so the way that happens is code like this. This is the thing that was changed from D3. The way it worked with D3 was d3.select, but these days this stuff is kind of built into JavaScript, so you don't need to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this code, and then I'm going to go back into my browser, and I'm going to go View, Developer, JavaScript Console. The JavaScript Console could show up on different places for you depending upon how your computer is set up. It might show up on the right-hand side, probably not on the left-hand side. I'm going to put mine on, let's do the right-hand side. Probably a pretty normal place for it to be. I'm just going to copy this code and we're going to see what it does. It's saying, hey, document, query selector, whatever that means, main. I'm going to run it, hit enter, and it looks like a little bit of HTML here. Main, nav, section, section, section. What we're doing is we're saying, hey, web page, go grab pretty much the entire page. If we look at the HTML here, we see that everything is inside of this main tag. So all we're doing here is we're saying, hey, grab that main tag there. This next line here, main.querySelector #scrolly. If we run that, we can see, okay, it's not selecting this part up here. It's not selecting this part down here. It's just selecting the part where the scrollytelling happens. It's selecting our sticky thing, it's selecting our steps, all of that. The reason why it does #scrolly is because that's how you talk about things that have IDs. It's the exact same thing as the CSS selector up here. We're just saying grab the thing with the ID of scrolly. But instead of document, which is the entire page, we're saying main. Now this, we said, the original code in the page was main equals this. And then you can say, now that we've gotten this main, let's go grab the thing inside of it. Let's go grab the scrolly inside of it. So let's say there were multiple things with the ID of scrolly on the page. We only want the one that's inside of main. And then after that, we save that as the variable scrolly, so we can talk about it later. And then we say, hey, find the sticky thing that is inside of scrolly and save that as sticky. So same thing, it just grabs that sticky thing that's hiding in the background there. And then we do the same thing for the article, same thing for the steps. We say, hey, grab that article. I don't think we really need to get that specific. And then we say, hey, article. There's a little bit of a change here. We do query selector all dot step. If you look at this code here, article query selector all dot step. Instead of query selector all will get all of the things with the class of step that are inside of that article. If we just did query selector, it would just run it and it would only grab one of them. Whereas query selector all is going to say, hey, we care about all of these different steps. Now, this magic thing over here is the JavaScript console. It allows me to run JavaScript one line at a time and not have any lasting effect on the page. So when I refresh this, all of the code that I typed in here goes away. It's very, very useful to find bugs in your code. If there are errors in it, they'll show up over here. It's very useful to kind of try out code and just see if it works or not before you actually type it in the code area over here. So for example, let's say I wanted to grab this one right here. I could say document query selector, and instead of saying, hey, grab main, then grab the thing inside of main, then grab the thing inside of scrolly, then grab the thing inside of the article, like that, I could just say, find me a paragraph tag. But there are probably multiple paragraph tags in here, right? So instead, I can say, find me the paragraph tag, well, sticky thing. Find me the paragraph tag that is inside of sticky thing. And there we go, it's there. And I can use this to make changes to the page. Instead of, writing styles up here, if I wanted to somehow, for some reason, do it with JavaScript, I could say, change the style of the color to be red. And that would say, hey, go into the thing with the class of sticky thing, find the paragraph tag in there, and then change it to be the color red. And then when I refresh the page, it goes away. But again, if I type this code again, it's going to run it. Now, one thing to pay attention to is you might think you're good at CSS, right? You think you know what position is, left, width, background color, all of these things. Once you've changed the color, if you try to change the background color, let's say, you say, I know background color is background-color. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say .style.background-color equals red. I'm going to move this down to the bottom so we can see the whole line at once. If you run this, it's going to give you an error. Why is that? Well, this right here is JavaScript, and when you write JavaScript, you cannot put hyphens or dashes in really anything. If you were converting something from CSS to JavaScript, we're going to change it to background capital C color. We can't really see that. Let's turn it to green instead. It's ugly, but it's fine. You could also know that by if you type background, it's going to suggest a lot of things to you. So just let the browser kind of steer you. When it says, hey, do you want, background color? And you say, yes, sure, background color blue, we are good to go. And then because this JavaScript console, we're just using it to test out code, when we refresh, it all goes away. And we're back to our standard here. All right, so we set color, we set background color. Let's get back to looking at what happens in here. So right here, this is us using the scrollama library. Why is this code like this? Well, because when you go to the scrollama webpage, it tells you this is what you do. When you use scrollama, you just say, hey, let's start using scrollama. So this isn't something that you can change. Don't think too hard about it. Just, it's fine. It's fine. Right here, this is a function. It's a chunk of code that is read by itself. This is the beginning and this is the end because of these curly braces. They're kind of hugging the function in here. They're hugging this chunk of code. This chunk of code is called handle step enter. We can assume it's what happens when a step is entered. But for now, we're just going to ignore it. Just know that this is one big chunk of code. We have another function here called init. It is one big chunk of code. We can also ignore that because we're not using it yet. We know this is the beginning. We know this is the end because those curly braces are surrounding it. We know init is the name because it's the thing that comes after function. And then down here at the very, very end of the script tag, we have init and then empty parentheses after it. And what this means is, hey, JavaScript, let's go run init. Let's go do it. It's going to be great. And so even though we just ignored this chunk of code, this function init, now we're going to go back and take a look at it. So we hop into init and we start running this code here. Scroller. If this seems familiar, it's because up here, this is us saying, hey, this is scrollama. This is our scroller. This is the thing that's going to be in charge of making our scrolling happen. Now, if you come to JavaScript from the world of, let's say, Python, where indentation is very important, new lines are very important, things like that, JavaScript is a little looser, a little bit freer. This is all one line of code. Another way for this line of code to look could be this. But because, JavaScript is nice and fun and things are maybe sometimes a little bit easier to read based on how you format them, JavaScript will let us format however we want. Indentation, lack of indentation doesn't really matter. I could, indent that all the way over here. I could put these two things on the same line. It wouldn't be a big deal. So what's happening here with this scroller is it's just saying, hey, we want to set this scroller up. Here are all of our options. What is going on here? What do these different options do? Offset 0.33. If we look at this page, we have this little trigger right here, this little annotation that says, hey, when you cross one of these steps with this line, you are going to trigger. You're going to say, I'm going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, right? If we change this number, that trigger is going to move further down the page. This is just a stylistic thing based on the way that you want your scrollytelling to work. You could put this anywhere. I'm going to leave it at 0.33. Debug can be true, or I'm going to assume it can be false. If we set it to false, that trigger disappears, but it still works. So that's just our ability to debug our page to see what's going on. And now this step here, what it does is say the steps on the page are the class of step inside of the article tag, inside of the thing with the scrolly ID. If you put spaces between these, that means this inside of this inside of this. So this is our class of step. It's inside of our article tag. It is inside of ID equals scrolly. If you wanted to have multiple different scrollytelling experiences on the page, this might be something that you need to change. And next up, we have on step enter, handle step enter. Well, we know handle step enter because we saw it before. It's the name of a function. It's the name of a chunk of code. But what is on step enter? Something to know about JavaScript is JavaScript has a few very important concepts to know about. One of them we talked about already, the DOM, the document object model. It's the idea that there's stuff on the page, a step, an article, a main, a document, and you can grab them. You can say, give me that main thing. Give me all those steps. Give me those. We're going to do something with them. We'll change the color. We'll do whatever we want to them. Another very important thing to think about in JavaScript are events. Events and event listeners. Events are things that happen on the page. If I click, that's an event. If I hover, it's an event. If I scroll, that's an event. If I type in a form field, that is an event. There are a ton of different JavaScript events. Let's find a nice long list of them. So changes, clicks, mouse overs, mouse outs, key down, onload, things like that. There are a million. And based on the code you are writing, the libraries you're working with, you're going to be doing different things with these events. So if we skip down a little bit, down here, we're going to listen for an event named resize. And when the page is resized, we're going to say, hey, scroller, the page got resized. We're going to run this chunk of code, which we can't see. This is just the scrollama's ability to understand that the page got resized. So this is one way of listening for an event and making something happen when the event happens. This is the normal JavaScript way. We say, hey, window. It's kind of like document. It's just like the page itself. We say, hey, window, please listen for the resize event and then run this code. Our scroller, on the other hand, we're saying, hey, when the step enter event fires or is triggered or happens, when that overlap happens here, this is us entering the step. We enter the first step, we enter the second step, we enter the third step. When that happens, run this code here. So it's the same thing with the add event listener. The name of the event here is resize. The name of the event here is probably step enter. This is us adding a listener. This is us adding a listener. What do we run when resize happens? Scroller.resize. What do we run when step enter happens? Handle step enter. These are just different because one is a library, one is JavaScript or raw JavaScript, and they just decided to write it differently. So what's important to us when we are going through here is we are scrolling. Things are happening when we are scrolling. Why are things happening? Because every time we trigger step enter right here, step enter, step enter, step enter, step enter, handle step enter is happening. Let's look at this code here. So when handle step enter happens, there's this thing called response. Who knows what that is? We got this element here, whatever that is. Then in theory, we go through all of the steps and remove isActive. So I guess there's some class that's called isActive. If we go up here, we can see it. IsActive sets the background to goldenrod. So when we scroll over it, we say, hey, remove isActive from all of these steps. But then I guess add isActive to the step that we're on, perhaps. So as we see, if we do a little bit of an inspecting here, this is our step right here. It's not highlighted, it's not goldenrod. We can see it highlighted down here. As we scroll over it, bam, is active is added to it, and as a result of it having that class, the background color changes. What is L really though? Well, let's look at it. How are we going to look at this L? We're going to use console.log. You cannot use print here if you come from the Python world. Print is going to actually try to print the web page for you. Console.log is going to send something to the JavaScript console. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the JavaScript console. I'm going to refresh the page. And as I scroll down, when I do this first step and handle step enter fires, bam, this is what our step is. Bam, this is what our step is. So if we highlight here, we see, oh, this is the step we just went to. If we highlight here, oh, that's the step we just came out of. So L is our element. It is our step that we are currently on. This is going to be our L. 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 Now, our final line here, sticky query selector P inner text equals L dataset dot step. Let's take this one at a time. Sticky query selector P says find me the paragraph tag that's inside of the sticky element. What's the sticky element? Oh, it's when we found the sticky thing that's inside of our scrolly. So what is that? It is this background area here. This background area here that we can't see very well, but it is there. So this whole thing is sticky thing, and then this right here is the text of our p tag. Now, when you want to update the text of something, you do .inner text. .inner text equals, and then you set it to l.dataset.step. If we scroll back up, we see that every step has something called data-step, data-step, data-step. Let's change it. Let's change it and refresh the page. So it starts at 0, but once we hit this first step, it now says 111. So somehow the code from here, this data.step, is being moved into here. And that's the code right here. We're saying, hey, go to the L, grab the data out of it. Data-step. Data-step is nothing fancy. We could say data-color equals red, data-color equals green, data-color equals blue, data-color equals red, and we could change it to be l.dataset.color. And then 0, hey, it's red. Hey, it's green. Hey, it's blue. So anytime you want to, make something change here, make something change on the background, you can add it as a data attribute inside of your step and use l.dataset in order to grab it. Now, what I want to do here is I want to use both data step and data color in kind of a fun way. Right now, our background area says red, or it says blue, or it says whatever. I want to make it something a little bit more exciting. We have these numbers here. Let's say we want to actually make them a sentence. Let's say we want to say l.dataset. What was it? Step. So step number. I'm just going to add that on the end of there. So now it's going to take the data-step and it's going to put it in this sentence here. Refresh. Step number 111, step number 222, step number 333, step number 444. Now, if you know me, you know that I hate something that looks like this. I love fill in the blanks. I love us saying step number, bam, let's just put something right there. The way you do that in JavaScript, it's similar to Python if you come from the Python world. Instead of quotation marks, we're going to use backticks. These are not single quote marks. These are back ticks. They point the backwards way. On my standard American keyboard, they're next to where the tilde is. What I do is, these are called template literals. I say step number, L dataset step, and then I put a $sign there. So this is how you do fill in the blanks with JavaScript. It's going to take this sentence and say step number, L dataset dot step. I'm actually going to change this back to smaller numbers for our next step. And so now when I refresh, it's going to do a fill in the blanks with that step number. Step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, step number 4. Now, why wouldn't we just write step number 1, step number 2, step number 3 in there? Give me a second and I'll get to that. The next thing we want to do is we want to change this background color based on data color. So where is this background color? Is the background color actually on the P, or is it on sticky thing? So okay, it is on sticky thing. It says we have sticky thing here. Background color is that. If I change it to red, it would turn red. Okay. So what we're going to do when we come through, I'm going to say, hey, when I hit this step, I could say sticky, change your background color to be, for example, red. Let's say we always wanted it to be red. We could have this line here. Remember, you do .style, the name of the style. And because this is JavaScript, not CSS, we do background, not dash color, but background capital C color. So we're going to refresh this. We're going to scroll down, and when it fires that event, runs that code, bam, turns red. Still red, still red, still red. Funnily enough, we saved data color, so we can say, hey, take the element that you're currently on, grab the data from it. Why is it not L.data? I don't know, it's L.dataset. And then grab the color attribute from the data. So we're saying data color. And now as we scroll, it's going to be automatically updating both the text of the background and the background color of the background. Now we're going to do one more thing to it. We're going to change the size of this text. So let's see, the size of this text is under sticky thing P. So we're going to be changing the font size. What we could do, sticky query selector P means, hey, go find the paragraph tag inside of it. We want to change the font size, so it's font size. And let's say we just wanted to make it 3 REMs. And you're like, what's an REM? And I'm like, the Jangle Pop band from Georgia. But additionally, it's just some sort of measurement. Who knows what it means? It's fine. Just stick with it. So I always think it's best to set things to just like a static number first or a static color first. Test to make sure that code works, and then adjust this here. So what we're going to do, refresh. As we fire that event, bam, the text has now gotten small. What I want to do is use L.dataset.step as a fill in the blanks here. So instead of, 3 pixels or 3 REMs or 9 REMs, I'm going to say, let's do a fill in the blank with L.dataset.step. So it'll be 1 REM, 2 REMs, 3 REMs, getting bigger every time. Why does this not change color like this changes color? Oh, it's because we need to do backticks here. Backticks, not single quotes, not double quotes, but backticks will let us do fill in the blanks in JavaScript. So now I'm going to go back, I'm going to refresh, and now we'll start with some small numbers. A little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, biggest. Now, the most annoying thing that's happened so far in this is the fact that as I am scrolling, I can't actually see what's happening here. I can't see what's going on behind these steps. And that's because there's not enough spacing in between these steps here. How is it that we can add spacing to these steps? Well, I'm going to open up the inspector and I'm going to look at them. And I'm going to say, okay, we have a step here and I want to add some sort of spacing below it. Right here, it says margin 0, auto, 2 rem, auto. And you're like, what? You can look at not layout, computed. It'll give you a little bit of a hint. It's saying here's what the margin, border, padding is. Here's the content size. What margin is, if you give it 4 different numbers, it goes around to the 4 different sides and does, like top, right, bottom, left, something like that. I find that very confusing. I'm going to click here and say margin, bottom, let's say 10 REMs. And you're like, what's an REM? And I say, doesn't matter. 10 just means a lot of it. And so now if I have margin, bottom, 10 REM, I get a little bit more space there. A little bit more space there, maybe 15 or so. Looks great. If I refresh the page though, it goes away. So I'm going to go back to my CSS up at the top. I'm going to say, hey, step, margin, bottom, 15 REM. They set the margin here. We could change it here. But I just want you to know that if you do a setting below another setting, the one on the bottom is more powerful. It overwhelms the one on top. So we're going to have margin bottom 15 REM. And there we go, looking pretty good. Another thing we might want to do is we have these backgrounds here. And these backgrounds don't look great. This color is a little bit, like we can't see through it, right? It's, we want to be able to see maybe a little bit of the red, a little bit of a blur there. The way you change this is if you go over here, you can see this changes the opacity of the background. Now, the thing you're going to want to do is you're going to click this little box here. You're going to adjust your colors, adjust your opacity slider, and when you get to something that you like, oh, that's actually not going to be good for you. Yeah, this is what you're going to do here. The issue is if you are using just HTML colors here, you can't do opacity. In order to do, oh wait, can you with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Oh wow, that's fascinating. So these last 2 numbers here are actually the opacity, which go from 0, 0 to FF, I guess. Huh, fascinating. Didn't know that. I was going to tell you to do RGBA, where you say, here's, an RGB number, an RGB number, an RGB number, and then an alpha number. But no, it's fine. We'll just stick with this. So slide this around, pick the color that you like, and then just copy this here. Go back and say, my step P, I want the color to be this color. Actually, is that? Yeah, that's just the step. We might have to change this one right here. Oh, we'll see. Yeah, we're going to change this one right here, step P. That's the color you're going to move to there. And now, ta-da, you can see things through things a little bit here. You would also have to change it for the goldenrod one, in which case we can just change this to some other number, such as FFF880, which is one of my favorite colors. And there we go. Oh, maybe the first number is alpha. Who knows? Whatever. However it works, just know you can highlight it and you can change it and grab grab the number there. I would probably change the color format to something like this, in which case you can grab something that's a little bit more readable. And then you'll be able to say, okay, 77, let's change this to like 4% or something like that. And, if you wanted to change 4%, that's going to be your opacity there. It's a little bit easier to understand as you're changing those numbers. Anyway, do that however you want. Just know that that is a way to change the background color for your step. So there's a little bit of opacity there. So we got a little bit of opacity. You could fool around with a margin here, padding here in order to make these different sizes. Finally, we're going to change one final thing, and that is we're going to put a background image on this background here. So instead of using a background color, we are going to set a background image. It is going to be mountains.jpg. We're going to say, I forgot to put a symbol back there, the semicolon. I'm going to say, hey, go into the images folder, grab mountains.jpg, and then set it as the background image. I refresh. Oh, sorry, did that for the wrong one. I made the step have the background image. It's not the step that should have the background image. It is the sticky thing, obviously. So I'm going to refresh, and now we're going to see we have this image back here. How delightful. We could also do background and then URL this here. Doesn't matter. You can do either one. It's going to work. When we look at this background image, there's a lot more image here that we would like to see. So the other attribute we want to change is background size. Sorry, not position. Background size. We're going to change it to cover. Background size cover is going to do the best possible fit to fit this inside of our little sticky thing back here. We can also do background size contain, which is going to make sure that the whole image fits there, but if you put the whole image there, it's going to repeat. So we're going to stick with color. We can also do background position, 50%, 50%, and that's going to center. Can I also do center, center? Yeah. Background position, center, center, which is going to center the image. It's going to crop it on the top, crop it on the bottom. Instead of, if we don't have background position there, it's going to be starting it from the top left-hand corner. So depending upon what your image looks like, one of those is probably going to work for you. Generally speaking, 9 times out of 10 for scrollytelling, maybe 95 times out of 100, or 19 out of 20, you're going to use background size cover, background position, center, center. Now, when you're doing scrollytelling, one thing you might want to do is change the background image as you are scrolling through here. That would be a nice thing to do. So maybe you have this have a certain image, this have a certain image, and then the image changes suddenly once you get to this one here. And the way you do that is the same way we change the color, same way we change the text on the step with this kind of code here. But instead of changing the background color, you might be changing, let's say the background image, for example. So anything else we want to do here? No, I think that pretty much has you most of the way there in terms of your scrollytelling abilities. I will upload this code probably to a gist, maybe to Google Drive, something like that. And then you can just fool around with it. So hop onto the documentation, especially if you want to have multiple different instances of scrollytelling going on here. Just to play back to something I said very, very originally, all of this is happening because of this scrolly ID here. We're saying we have something with the ID of scrolly. It looks like this. Here is our scrolly. It has a sticky thing in it. It has a bunch of steps. And then down here, we say, hey, when we scroll through this, let's set this up to be all of the steps inside of this scrolly here. So I'm going to say, if you want to make a second scrollytelling piece in here that is underneath of this first scrollytelling thing here, I'm going to suggest that you copy and paste this whole section here, and then you just start making another one, scrolly 2 or something like that. You'll have to update your CSS up here. You'll have to, maybe add another one of these here to set up a second scrolly thing. Do you need another scrollama scroller? Can you just use it with this scrollama scroller? Who knows? You'll have to experiment, find out things like that. If you have comments, you can bring them up in the comments. If you have issues with the code I wrote here, inside of the overlays, inside of the side scrolling things, you can bring those up in GitHub issues on the GitHub repository. But generally speaking, Scrollama, pretty solid, simple library. I have faith that using data attributes here and then bringing them up again down here in the handle step enter, you should be able to get a decent amount of scrollytelling in there. Play around with the styles, make it your own, make it look nice. And then when you finally end up figuring it out, when you finally end up posting it, either use Bottlejack or GitHub Pages to host it on the internet, and then throw a link in the chat. I will make a couple posts that kind of walk you through how to move all this stuff to the internet if you're not sure how to do that. So good luck. Let me know how it goes.